delays in transfer rollouts and launch. The solution profile here is to create a continental capacity building program for NRA's technical staff to help build capabilities on vaccine development, manufacturing, and transfer regulatory processes. The second is to develop an early engagement framework between NRAs and local manufacturers. There are three, next slide. The central management of IP information and technology support services could help enable vaccine technology development on the continent in the long run. There are several opportunities areas that were identified, and this include increased transparency around patenting of vaccine technologies and production processes, and strengthening capabilities of IP offices in Africa, especially on patent examination processes, and strengthening capabilities of manufacturers and researchers on IP in licensing and partnership. The solution here is to develop regional vaccine technology and IP support service. And this service is proposed to be located within the vaccine technology transfer and IP enablement unit, which I will describe in my last slide, to enable central management of IP information and technology support services. The second major opportunity identified is to develop alternative technologies or processes to produce vaccines around licenses not obtained from IPR holders. And then the solution here is to set up a coordinated R&D effort to enable development of alternative technologies and processes. Again, the next presenter, the R&D workstream, will describe this in detail. Next slide. So this is the unit that talking about the vaccine technology transfer and IP enablement unit, which we believe could help facilitate the transfer of technology and IP to the continent through four primary roles. It is important to mention here that this unit will not act as a go-between the tech providers and the tech recipients, but instead will be a facilitator. And also activities within will be executed within the legal framework of African Union and African CDC. The first role of this unit is in capacity building by supporting local manufacturers in getting tech transfer ready. And some of the activities here will include collecting playbook for local manufacturers on how to get tech transfer ready and to conduct baseline assessment to understand key capacity gaps across local manufacturers and to link local manufacturers to potential partners and resources to plug identified capacity gaps. The second role of this unit is that of matchmaking by connecting tech transfer ready African vaccine manufacturers with tech providers. And some of the activities will require collecting fact packs to help tech transfer ready manufacturers adequately position their capabilities and to facilitate initial introductions between the tech providers and local manufacturers. And the third role of this unit will be to roll out support by facilitating provision of ongoing support for tech transfers, including facilitating access to ad hoc support for tech providers and tech recipients. And this includes sharing of best practices and lessons learned, funding, partnerships, talent development, R&D capacity, manufacturing and logistics capacity, early NRA engagements, and incentives for providers. And finally, the fourth role of this unit, vaccine technology and IP information support by supporting licensing of existing new and alternative vaccine technologies. And some of the activities research and develop knowledge on patent applications, vaccine technologies, and emerging trends and technologies, and strengthening capabilities of manufacturers and IP offices on IP and technology license, licensing and partnerships, and then to foster collaboration between local manufacturers and with international partners and public health organizations, and finally support the review and strengthening of IP policy in Africa as it relates to vaccine technology. I thank you very much, and it is my pleasure and honor to introduce the co-moderators of this session. The first is Dr. Ahmed Oman, who is the Deputy Director of the African Center for Disease Control and Prevention based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and Ms. Winnie Beam-Yima, who is the Executive Director of the Joint United Nations Program on HIV/AIDS, which is called the UN/AIDS in Geneva, Switzerland. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those very kind words, Simon, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues, wherever you're joining from. Special good morning, of course, to Winnie. I hope you're in Geneva, and I hope it is cold enough to keep everyone working inside the facilities. Pleasure to be co-moderating this with you today. Colleagues, we have an excellent panel today, and we have Dr. Charles Gore, the Executive Director of Medicine's Patent Pool. I think there's a cross channel with the interpreter. I hope that will be resolved. Secondly, we have David Caslow, the Chief Scientific Officer of PATH. We have Ms. Emma Whitley, the Deputy General Counsel and Head of Business Development at CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovations. We have Martin Fried, Coordinator for the Initiative for Vaccines Research at the World Health Organization. Patrick Soon-Shiong, the Executive Chairman of Immunity Bio Networks in California. And finally, Petro Terblanche, the Managing Director of Afrigen Biologics and Vaccines from South Africa. So as we go through this particular session, we've heard about the work of the Secretariat through its various work streams. Yesterday, we had a long discussion around the needs for us to build the capacity to do our own manufacturing here on the continent. We've also had today some of the challenges that we need to be facing up to. And in this particular roundtable today, we want to see how we can be able to create an enabling ecosystem for technology providers elsewhere, and of course, recipients here on the continent, to be able to have this ease of transfer of technology so that we can continue with this vision and deliver on it to be able to manufacture vaccines here on the continent. And in fact, as we discuss this, you can translate the vaccines conversation to any other health product, whether it is diagnostics, whether it is therapeutics, whether it is non-pharmaceutical health products. The whole range will follow pretty much the same path. So let me start by focusing on incentives that could encourage tech providers from across the globe to share their technologies with African companies, or how the tech providers can actually be able to set up and produce here on the continent. And I would like to ask Patrick to give this the first shot. Just what are these key incentives, Patrick, that we could be able to use to encourage these providers to either come and manufacture here on the continent, or to transfer that technology to very many companies that are willing and ready to be our core of expanding our vaccines manufacturing on the continent. Patrick?
Well, thank you for having me. Look, I think in order for me to answer that question, you really need to ask the question of what are we asking to be transferred? Because I don't think there really is a real incentive, to be very frank, with regard to the first generation of vaccines, which then says really what from a concrete perspective does this continent of Africa require? And what it really requires, I believe, is a second generation vaccine. I think Professor Charlotte Watts yesterday spelled it out very correctly, that unless we can actually prevent transmission rather than just prevention of infection, we're not going to get into this pandemic. With regard to Africa, unless we treat immunosuppressed patients with HIV, TB, and patients that are with cancer with immunosuppressed in the continent. And then finally, with regard to the what, as long as we have a vaccine that is practically and can be practically manufactured. And this is when Dr. Butinemi spoke to about the idea of creating clusters of technology within the continent. Clusters meaning you need more than one platform, whether you need a DNA platform, an RNA platform, a subunit protein platform. So before you actually, I believe, talk about the incentives, you really need to talk about what are we as a continent requiring. I can obviously speak to what we are going to be doing and why. But I think one of the practical incentive is to have a guaranteed demand because there's going to be a huge amount of investment. With regard to the IP, again, I think the first generation of vaccines really needs to be supplanted with this next generation. And therefore, all of this capacity need to be generated within the continent itself and can be with pharmaceutical companies that are willing. When you really think about the incentive really should be is that nobody's safe until everybody's safe. We should really be thinking really as a humanity and really not casting this in terms of a dollars and cents issue. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm happy to speak to what we are doing so that I don't take too much of the panelists' time here.
No, thanks a lot, Patrick. And saying that often shared statement of no one is safe until everyone is safe, I say that a lot as well. But to make that an incentive is really putting it in a different perspective. And Patrick, very briefly, could you touch on what you're doing in the context of actually bringing technology onto the continent? Not a full presentation, but just something that can eat at our minds a bit as we think about the technology transfer.
Right. Well, luckily and happily, I was born on the continent. I was born in South Africa. I was born under apartheid, and I understand the hardships and I understand the needs. And luckily and happily, I had the privilege of being able to establish the resources and know-how in the United States. So for the past decade, we have been building vaccine platforms, a DNA platform, an RNA platform, a subunit protein platform, an adjuvant platform, and now a bacterial derivative platform. So we had the privilege in the United States of building GMP manufacturing at large scale for all of these platforms. With that knowledge, this was all prior to COVID, the opportunity for me to bring that home into the continent and specific to South Africa to start was an opportunity, and I jumped at that very early on in the beginnings of COVID. We are already in clinical trials in South Africa for HIV. So what have we done? I'm about to announce today that we have now formed NANT Africa. Within NANT Africa, we formed NANT South Africa. We have already acquired manufacturing facilities. So the idea was to be very, very practical, concrete. And so what have we done? One of the things is to build capacity, you need literal manufacturing plants that have capacity of 150,000 square feet, 200,000 square feet, so that the standards are equivalent to that of EU and FDA standards. The idea is to bring in second generation platforms, build the vaccines and export. That's the only sustainability for the organizations, and build it within Africa by Africans for Africans. So I'm announcing today that in Botswana, in the ICON building. We will be building the subunit protein with Baylor as a partner and with IDRI as a partner. In Cape Town and in South Africa, we now have 150,000 square feet manufacturing facility that will be building upstream. It is so important not to be, I don't know what the word is, to focus on upstream rather than just a finished fill facility. So you need to have the capability of all these the platforms. Most importantly, the platforms should be varied. So we have an adenovirus platform that is already in clinical trials. In fact, soon will be in phase 3 clinical trials in South Africa. We have a self-amplifying RNA platform that is about to go into clinical trials. We have a yeast platform which manufactures subunit proteins, which is already in clinical trials in India. We have a bacterial platform, which is now already in clinical trials in Australia and about to be in the United States. These are all second generation vaccines. Why do we need them? Because we need them to actually generate T cells that overcomes all variants. Our preclinical and clinical data so far shows that these vaccines, because they prevent not just infection, but kill the virus itself, overcomes these variants. So these are the concrete practical things that we are doing. And then finally, we need to very quickly address treating patients with HIV and cancer and immunosuppressed, because these will be the harbors of incubation of these mutations.
Thanks a lot, Patrick. Really fantastic information there. And you'll always remain an African, whoever it is that is your neighbor in California. They better know you're still ours. So all the fine work that NANT is doing, and I like NANT Africa. This is really a very good way to go, and setting up facilities on the continent for the different aspects of the work is really, really good news. And we will unpack this in the days to come so that we show that all this effort is actually bearing some very, very good fruit. So thank you very much for that, Patrick. Let me shift to Petro now and ask how can we fast track preparedness of more and more local manufacturers so that they can be ready for this tech transfer. And I think Patrick has already shown the way there, but how do we get more of our local manufacturers to be ready for this tech transfer? And I'll ask Petro to go first. Petro?
Thank you. We do what Patrick is doing. Maybe let me just start and make another comment. I think critically is we've heard over the last 2 days the importance of partnerships, and I think in a way Patrick has also alluded to that. How do we build these partnerships? And I'm looking at this panel, and the African Union, African CDC, such strong supporters of the platform in South Africa for mRNA technology training and technology transfer and training. On this panel, we have Path at the moment at Afrigen, David Kessler and his team supporting partnerships. Charles Gore from Medicines Patent Pool on this panel, Martin Friede from WHO. Again, I think partnerships that has common goals and that has a specific objective to align with the strategy for continent is incredibly important. How do we get more capacity on the continent? We know what the challenges are. We know there's challenges around skills. We know there's challenges around access to different platforms. Patrick said it earlier, it is not only one platform that will make this continent reach its absolute goal to produce 60% of its vaccines by itself by 2040. I also believe it's incredibly important that it's a vertically integrated strategy, not only full finish, but backward integrated. How do we build this? We build this partnerships, number one. Number two, access to technology. Maybe I can talk a bit about what the Hub has been doing over the last 6 months. The Hub was set up with a specific objective, very aligned with the COVAX initiatives and very, very aligned with the Partners for African Vaccine Manufacturing strategy. The Hub was designated to receive turnkey technology transfer In the absence of that, and still in discussions with that, what is actually happening, which I think is good for the continent, is we have a hybrid model. We are, in fact, developing end-to-end mRNA vaccine manufacturing capabilities and capacity. We're doing it ourselves, not with a technology transfer, but with knowledge transfer and partnerships and technical support across the globe. There is no better place to learn and no better process to learn than to do it yourself, but with significant knowledge transfer. We don't have a turnkey tech transfer opportunity. But there's another component that I think is critical, is to build an ecosystem for vaccine manufacturing. You also require R&D capabilities. So what is built in this partnership that is supported by people on this call, but also by the African Union, African CDC, is an objective not only to produce the first COVID-19 mRNA vaccine on the continent within 10 months or 12 months from now, but to build long-term sustainability. And there's an objective, but as part of the hub, which is an R&D objective. And that is led by the Medical Research Council. I think people like Richard Gordon are also somewhere participating in these sessions, is to build R&D from discovery science to upstream R&D, downstream R&D, starting at genomic surveillance right through to clinical trials. And there's an objective built into this hub that addresses exactly that. How do we have discovery? How do we deal with new variants? The hub is already using our own knowledge base that we built up to look at making a second generation vaccine that may be relevant for Omicron. And this is using the knowledge that we built up over the last 3 months. And this is for Africa. This is in Africa for Africa. We are looking at a pipeline of vaccines through R&D capabilities that is based on the continent. But what we do is we package it together, we build a value chain from concept to a product that can go into the market. So building capacity on this continent will require R&D capabilities, it will require development of new technologies, and it will require establishment of platforms. In addition, what is required on the continent is facilities that has the ability to produce GMP clinical trial material. At the moment, there is no such facility on the continent. Again, through the partnerships that's been created with the African Union, African CDC, WHO, Medicines Patent Pool, there will be in Cape Town by June 2022 a certified SAPRA licensed facility suitable for the production of clinical trial material. Part of creating an ecosystem, and that will enhance capacity building for years to come, and meeting that vision that we all have built and that we all share, is to produce 60% of our own vaccines by 2040. Thank you.
Excellent, Petro. And to remind us that it's not just tech transfer, some element of knowledge transfer, and then using what we have as we wait for the others to fall into place. A very clear message there. And we need to trumpet that a little bit more. Now, let me ask the same question, but a bit differently to you, David. And I think with Path, we are on the right path. So I'm going to ask you, when you look at the need, and I think Petro's already touched on this, the need to build some very practical partnerships that are going to give us that leap that we require to go to the next stage, rather than take all these decades to reach somewhere where, as others have done, we know that there's new knowledge, there's new technology, there's new willingness to be able to share some of this knowledge. How do we build the partnership that will take us to the next step? And you can touch on the work that Path has been doing in this space as well. David?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Amit, for the kind invitation to join this panel. Really, I'm not going to have any magical insights in here. I think there's some tried and true methods for tech transfer. It's just how do we accelerate those? And so it's really about two simultaneous integrated activities. Think of it as two teams on a playing field, each with its own counterpart, and they're playing off of exactly the same playbook. And so it's an integrated approach to playing on the field. So on the recipient side, honestly, it's all about the infrastructure, the capital infrastructure, the human resources in the factory floor, and all the supporting activities. It's the surrounding infrastructure, the utilities, the vendors, the import and exports, and all that sort of thing that needs to be in place, and then the regulatory framework. So it's really building that capacity as quickly as possible. But then on the provider side, it's really about hosting the key recipients. And I'll give you an example of where this worked brilliantly. Almost 3 decades ago, those recipients actually come to the factory floor at the host transfer, and then they practice on the factory floor where it's actually being made. And then in addition to proprietary material and a comparability protocol, then those two teams go together to the recipient and work on the factory floor there. And I'll give you an example of that. So almost 30 years ago, within a couple of years of licensure of the very first recombinant protein subunit vaccine by Merck, Merck decided to do a tech transfer to China. And how was that done? They first built a mock facility in Michigan in the United States, where both teams worked together to build that facility, to get it up and running. And then they broke down that facility, they transferred it to China, restarted it, and that facility is still making hepatitis B vaccine to this day. And so it's just really this simultaneous integration of two teams working seamlessly together is a tried and true way of doing tech transfer. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thanks, David. And the whole concept of trying to get something that is working elsewhere to be transferred to another location really does work. But I'll round back this if we have time after all the panelists have mentioned this, just the challenges of the modular approach, considering that we have very different environments, as it were, and not just for regulatory that you touched on, but also for business, the ease of doing business, infrastructure, etc. But we'll round that back to us. But let me hand over to my co-moderator, Winnie, to take us through the next set of questions to our panelists. Winnie?
Thank you, Ahmed. And it's a pleasure to be co-moderating with you this morning, and greetings to all the panelists. We've all been introduced. And now I wanted to build on what we've just heard, how tech transfers are long and complex processes requiring various partnerships and requiring action on many fronts. And I want to go straight to ask my first questions. But before I do, let me reflect here. We also heard not only that they are very long processes, taking many years, multiple stakeholders, many steps. We also heard that there are ways to fast track, especially with the second generation of vaccines. So accelerating successful execution of tech transfers to achieve the ambition of 2040 is what I want to explore. What key partnerships can help to accelerate tech transfers on the continent? How do we foster collaboration between the key stakeholders and the main tech transfer parties, such as pharmaceutical companies? We just heard from David the exciting story of Merck. But let me hear now from Emma. Should I start with you? Emma, give us the exciting story here. What will it take to make those partnerships? And particularly when they are global pharmaceutical companies, what will it take?
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to join this meeting today. There are three things that really matter to incentivize these partnerships. The will, so Dr. Patrick talked about this earlier. Companies might be persuaded to do something, but to do it fast, they need to want to do it. And those types of motivations can be highly specific to the organizations concerned. So the first thing to do is always worth really scrutinizing that motivation, uncovering it early on if speed is important, because then the effort can be focused on the organizations whose motivations might be aligned or fit well with the motivations of the recipient, but also so that you can speak to it and use that to influence. And it may be the market piece, the incentive framework that was mentioned earlier on, may also be, for some of the larger players, a way to demonstrate their corporate social responsibility. The way forward, so these are the ones we talk about a lot, a capable recipient and provider, as David's outlined, the regulatory and quality control environment that's familiar with that type of product and technology and can provide the necessary support. A way to finance the tech transfer plan, critically for future economic sustainability, to ensure that investment is not lost.
Mm-hmm. Well, please go ahead. Continue.
Sorry, I would just add one more, which is trust. Without trust, tech transfer is going to be difficult and may not happen at all. You can't force trust. You can't force tech transfer, but you need to enable it. And there are lots of ways to enable the building of relationships and that trust.
Mm-hmm. That is hard, isn't it? It's almost an art and not a science, building the trust step by step. Thank you. Let me turn to David. David, you gave us that amazing story of Merck and the tech transfer to China and working together, almost like two teams playing. Tell us a bit about the challenges of doing that and how to overcome them, to build the partnership that lasts that long, moving from one continent and shifting and rebuilding in another.
So I'm going to say the same thing that Emma just said, but maybe in a slightly different way. And I think the starting point is you've got to align on a shared value proposition. You really need to understand what is the value proposition for each of the partners. And the more they overlap, the better. But you will notice that there will be some divergence in the value proposition. So then what you need to focus on is how do you identify those and how do you manage and mitigate those divergences in your shared value proposition? The second piece of it, Emma, spot on, it's about trust. And I would say that there is 3 dimensions of trust that become really quite important. Really understanding each partner's capabilities, recognizing those capabilities, recognizing where there's some gaps in those capabilities, calling those out and working to fill those gaps. The second is this honesty and really being candid with each partner about what's going on and what's happening in the partnership. And then the last one is benevolence. Things are not going to go as planned, right? There are going to be times of intense pressure. You really need to focus on grace under pressure. Always assume good intent between rather than some devious thing with your partner. And then finally, I think, and I talked about this, is to have a shared playbook that you're both working on and having that documented and working off of that and keep going back to that to make sure that you stay in alignment as you move forward. I might mention one other thing in this context. And something that I think is going to be increasingly more important, and it's a priority for PATH. And that is, I think we need to rethink the old partnership model where the global north comes in, right? Global analysis, move over, we need to do this, just follow us. to more of an equitable partnership model, where we work together as a partner, and don't assume that the Global North partner will be the chair of the steering committee. Actually, we want the Global South partner to be the chair of the steering committee. We want the Global South partner to be the senior author on those scientific papers. So I think we need to rethink this kind of old partnership model that we've used in the past between the Global North and Global South. And that's something that PATH is really committed to. Over.
Inspiring. Thanks. I now want to shift the conversation to intellectual property. And I'm going to turn to you, Martin. While tech transfers can build up the manufacturing capacity in Africa, but to really reduce Africa's dependence on the transfer of existing technologies so that in the longer term, there is development of new and alternative technologies on the continent, IP, intellectual property licensing, is important here. It could help us accelerate the acquisition of existing technology and to establish research and development collaboration on new vaccines. So what do we need to have in place for increased licensing of IP and know-how? What would it take? And I'm turning first to you, Martin.
Okay, thanks. So that's a difficult question. So I will try and give some answers. First of all, I just want to emphasize all of the speakers that have spoken so far. I fully agree with them. And the key word, Emma brought this up, and then David repeated it, the will. There needs to be a will. So let's first of all look at what some of the key barriers that we currently have in Africa are. The biggest barrier that I think we have is the lack of a skilled workforce. Now, there's the skilled workforce at universities of researchers, but there's also the skilled workforce that is going to be able to translate what these universities discover, what these universities optimize, what these universities develop, to translate this in product. And Africa, unfortunately, has a big lack of skilled workforce. So we need to build that workforce. This requires a will. Now, there's an old African saying, I was like Patrick, I was born in Southern Africa and I lived most of my life there. And I remember the saying that if you want to plan for short term, you plant mealies or maize. If you want to plan longer term, you plant some fruit trees. But if you really want to plan for the future, you build schools. So we need to be building the infrastructure where we're going to be training the African workforce. Now, some of you may have seen that WHO has recently announced a call for expression of interest to host a biomanufacturing workforce training center. This is going to be the actual identification of this training center is going to be done shortly. But what we really want to do with this training center is to be ensuring that African countries have a workforce that will be trained in how to produce not just the product, but actually how to function, how to operate in a biomanufacturing facility. Because without these facilities, without the workforce, we won't be going anywhere. But then let's come to the IP and how do we accelerate the transfer of licensing. Well, ideally, I would love to say, well, Africa should be inventing. So, let's get onto the front foot here. Rather than us licensing in, should we be licensing out? But to get there, we need to identify what our problems are. Right now, Africa is the test tube for many pharmaceutical countries. This is where we bring the products, we test them. These are not the products that are being made in Africa. So I would really exhort our political leaders to be trying to push Africa into the leadership position on this. Now, this isn't going to come within 1 year. This is going to take 20 years. But in 20 years, hope that we get there. In the meantime, how do we get more licensing in? Well, it has to be a win-win situation. There needs to be a win-win. Both parties need to see that there's a win to bring this in. We've got some issues in some African countries that IP is, we do not yet have an IP structure. We do not yet have an IP infrastructure. We don't have rules in the countries. We are still within TRIPS, we are still trying to catch up. We need to be building on this and ensuring that we have, as in other parts of the world, that we have a rigorous examination process for patents, that we can decide, is this patent good for the country, or is this not good for the country? And we need to ensure that we've got, along with our biomanufacturing workforce, that we have the workforce that is able to judge the value of licensing something in. Otherwise, we're going to be buying lots of patents, lots of licensing, and lots of things that actually are not going to help us. So I'm going to stop there and pass back to you, Winnie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. So you make the link between having a biomedical knowledge base that is strong with licensing, intellectual property licensing. Let me turn now to Charles. Charles and I met recently, and your work in the medical patents pool is so important and was key for the breakthrough to generics for HIV antiretrovirals. Tell us your view about this. Give us your experience on increasing licensing of intellectual property and know-how for the continent.
Thank you very much indeed, Winnie, and thank you very much for this opportunity. Yes, I think what the Medicines Patent Pool has shown is that, as Martin said, this can be a win-win situation, but it's not always been easy, to be honest. When the Medicines Patent Pool was set up in 2010 by Unitaid, there's actually significant doubt about its viability, about whether, in fact, the big northern pharmaceutical companies would want to give out licenses. And then interestingly, the US NIH, so an academic, if you like, a research institute, was the first to give us a license. And that triggered a trickle of companies coming and offering licenses. Until now, it's almost unthinkable, I think, that an HIV drug will be offered to the Medicines Patent Pool. But HIV is a very sort of specific case, the huge amount of global funding behind it and so on. In other areas, it's continued to be challenging to get the pharmaceutical companies to give licenses. As you've seen, very recently, we have had 2 antiviral drugs for COVID. And that's very encouraging. What we've not had is any licenses for vaccines. And clearly, it's unless there are incentives of some sort, it will be difficult. And those incentives, as has been mentioned, vary tremendously. They can be pressure, and obviously there's a huge amount of discussion at the moment around intellectual property and what should be done about it, particularly in a pandemic situation. Public pressure, governmental pressure, civil society, all these can play a part in persuading companies that it's a good idea to give licenses. Another initiative that WHO are involved with and leading, called CTAP, is actually looking at the moment about what sort of incentives could be provided to pharmaceutical companies. Having said which, clearly when you're talking vaccines, you're talking a lot more than simply patents and licenses. You're talking, as has been mentioned very clearly, the knowledge and the know-how are just as important, if in many cases a lot more important. And that, of course, as Emma and David said, does mean that there's got to be a tremendous amount of will from the provider. It's a lot of work. You can't get away from that. And that's why I think with the hub that Petro is overseeing at Afrigen, we've not had a turnkey technology offered to us. And as Petro said, I think that at the same time, much as that slows things down, it also is a tremendous opportunity to build that know-how internally in Africa. Because at the end of the day, as has been said, simply having the development done in the developed world and always transferring it is not the answer to this. It really isn't. It may be a short-term answer to a really urgent problem, but it is not the long-term way we need to go. And as Martin has said, we need to build up the capability and capacity within Africa to develop its own IP. And that is absolutely critical to this. And again, as David said, I'd like to just reiterate the extreme importance of equitable partnerships and the need for really initiatives like this to be led by Africa. And much as within COVAX and the Manufacturing Task Force Work Stream 3, which we are co-leading with WHO, I think WHO and particularly the Medicines Patent Pool simply see ourselves as facilitators of this. We're not leading it. We're just hoping that we can help in some way, us around the licensing and obviously Martin around many of the technical aspects and acquiring and bringing the expertise to support this. And I would just like to, having said all that, go slightly off-piste, if I might, and just say something about the tremendous support that I have seen for making this happen in Africa. Clearly, the will within Africa is enormous. But what I also notice, speaking to a lot of overseas development agencies, is their willingness to make this happen. And I would almost say that this subject is the flavor of the year in public health, and not surprisingly, given the appalling situation that we have been in around access to vaccines in Africa. However, and it seems really odd to be saying this, we do have to be careful that when we create this capacity, and it will come in Africa, we don't overcreate capacity. There are a lot of initiatives going on at the moment. And what is going to happen is if there's not some level of coordination or at least collaboration and sharing of information, people are going to be tripping over themselves. And what we're going to have in Africa is some white elephants sitting around where a lot of investment has gone into creating new facilities that are then not used. And then when we need them at the time of the next pandemic, they're not there. And I think this is a really important point that I would like it out, that in my view, the world gave WHO a mandate at the World Health Assembly this year in the local production resolution to lead on this. And clearly, it is the UN Agency for Health. And I think it's therefore incumbent on everyone who's got initiatives there to make sure that WHO is aware of them. Okay. So that there is as much coordination around this as we can achieve. Thank you.
Okay. Charles, you raise a very important point about the collective leadership of Africa providing strong coordination, collaboration, sharing of that market, ensuring that we don't have white elephants, like you've called them. But let me ask one more question to all of you together, which is building on what is the point that each of you raised, which is about motivation, which is about a shared value proposition, which is about incentives for making it happen, the transfer. And ask a question really that is about public-private partnerships. Because it seems to me that unless there is a public interest, that point about nobody's safe until all of us are safe, that will to share the technology is weak, because the private usually are driven by a profit motive, which leads me to ask the question, how do you understand the fact that Oxford AstraZeneca has licensed much more of its technology and know-how than, say, Pfizer or Moderna? Could it be because there is a public interest, a university, and a private company? Is this the way that we can accelerate this? What do you think? Who wants anyone to answer this question? And it's my last one.
I'm happy to address that. So look, I think what was discussed by David is exactly right. I think from a public-private perspective, and really speak both to the will and the infrastructure, and you can broaden this concept of the public side and the recipient side. Let me just tell you practically what I've done in the last 12 months. One, to work on the public side by working with the organization, with the country, within the country, whether it be South Africa or Botswana, to understand the regulatory structure, to ensure that we're working closely with SAPRA, to understand the actual infrastructure, the water, the power, the utilities. These are physical infrastructural needs that if they don't exist, no matter how willing you are, you won't have the capability. It's taken me 6 months to identify that, and we've done that. Then the next step is to say, okay, what are we going to be building in Africa that, for example, cervical cancer is not an issue, HPV, TB, schistosomiasis, chikungunya. These are the diseases, HIV, that we want to address, and cancer. What is exciting, however, and I think is lost today on the pharmaceutical industry, is that the technology of science has leapfrogged the standards of care. So high-dose chemotherapy, standards of TB, standards of HIV, it's all going to be surpassed by biologicals. And happily, we have now 400,000 square feet in the United States of GMP manufacturing of all these biologicals. So the idea of this Merck story is exactly right. To take this know-how and quite literally build a mirror image in Africa, and that's what we're doing in NANT Africa. And it's calling it NANT Africa, NANT South Africa, and a mirror image of Immunity Bio that's in Los Angeles, Colorado, and now soon in New York. So the opportunity to take these mirror images and then repurpose them immediately and create what I believe could be the Singapore of Africa in the world of biologics, and most importantly, to do this in multiple countries. We've taken on the challenge of taking on 2 countries simultaneously, Botswana and South Africa. And I believe with the ability to move this quickly, with already the GMP manufacturing of know-how, I'm going to set a different challenge for Africa, which is saying by 2025, you should have 1 billion doses. And it's actually not impossible, because quite literally, between the 3 hubs, Los Angeles, Colorado, New York, and Botswana, Gaborone, Cape Town, and Johannesburg, one could then generate this collective upstream and downstream. And at the same time, I've been working with every academic institution, University of Cape Town, University of Johannesburg, KwaZulu-Natal. We've established SERI. We submitted and sent 2 large sequencing machines, and with Tulio de la Vera. So working directly with the scientists and the MRC and SAPRA. So these are examples of what we're actually doing. It's not been as public but I think today, this event, we decided it is time to expose exactly what we're doing between Immunity Bio in the United States and NANT Africa and South Africa.
Thank you. Before I turn it back to my colleague Ahmed, I just want to say that this has been a very rich discussion about building the ecosystem that will enable local manufacturing of vaccines and other health technologies in Africa. I learned a lot from you, particularly about what the public sector needs to bring and put forward, and that so many stakeholders are involved. Steps are many, different
doivent être impliqués.
Different platforms that need to be created, but also something about the kind of corporate leadership, scientific leadership that we need in order to have a relationship that lasts a long time and over continents, countries, systems, and be able to succeed. We also saw in this discussion just how the regulatory environment is critical, and that too has to be built. So I just want to turn to my colleague also to give some reflections, but thank you so much for the discussion. Africa is ready to lead, and leadership is needed from the recipients to be able to partner successfully, but never again must it find itself dependent on what other countries and pharmaceutical companies may choose to provide for it. It must manufacture for itself these life-saving technologies. And creating an enabling ecosystem for the transfer is critical to that. So I want to thank very much Simon, who kicked off the discussion. Hand back to Ahmed to make his own last reflections. On our part, UNAIDS and the alliance we have created called the People's Vaccine Alliance, we will continue to rally international support around these African-led solutions on tech transfer. We will engage communities to advocate for better supportive environment. The best way to do this is when science connects with communities. Then you close the loop for finding the right science, the right solutions for health challenges. And we will press pharmaceutical companies to share their technologies. The international rules provide perverse incentives for companies to share. So we need to keep a pressure on companies, showing them that we need to share the technologies in order for all of us to be safe. So back to you, Ahmed, and I thank you all panelists. You can conclude.
Yes, no, thank you very much, Winnie. It's been a very engaging panel. And I'd seen Emma's hand up. Maybe before I quickly summarize, Emma, if you have a short version of your answer that you had that asked you to raise your hand. Yeah, no, I know, Winnie.
Happy to do that, Dr. Ahmed. Thank you for the opportunity. Just to let everybody know that one of the things CEPI is looking at to enable tech transfer to African manufacturing facilities and through that support the economic sustainability of those facilities is looking at how we can use CEPI's portfolio, how we can use the leverage points that we have in our agreements and specifically around equitable access and of course the funding of R&D for candidates pertinent to the African continent against Lassa fever, for example, Rift Valley fever and chikungunya, and look to see in what way we can use our portfolio to drive tech transfer to the continent. Thank you for the opportunity to share.
Thank you very much, Emma. And it's really good for you to end on that note that CEPI is going to be using its portfolio to try and get this forward. And as Winnie is saying, we are ready. And I would really like to ask each and every one of you as panelists, put your organizations on the table. I think all of you are already converted anyway, but bring the whole organization's capacity, influence, a little money as well, to the table so that we can actually turn this round. It is possible to do. We know the challenges, and I think Patrick has very practically shared some of those as an individual who's actually trying to get the tech transfer onto the continent. And there will be many more challenges coming up, but they are not insurmountable. We can be able to turn them around. And that's why I ask you and your organization, please bring it all onto the table. Second is some aspects of R&D have been discussed here for sustainability. And the session following this one is actually going to discuss R&D and how to build capacity on the continent. So log on into that one or stay on for that one, and you'll hear the kind of things that are on the table. Then let me say three last points. One is on Charles, what you have said, for us to be careful about overcreating. And, you know, if you look at the capacity on the continent, especially the highly trained capacity, it is not on the continent, it is somewhere else. So we really need to find a way of bringing back those Africans who have this knowledge, the experience, and working elsewhere in the world to come back and drive the process on the continent. And with good mapping, we should be able to have a very clear idea what kind of training capacity we need to be continuing with, and not end up with too much on the table. The second last thing that I would like to say is I think one theme has gone throughout the discussion, and that is one of urgency. And when we are bringing this on board from the different aspects of the different organizations, let us continue to hold on to urgency. And I like that target of 1 billion by 2020, I think it was 25. It's really not just for COVID, but it is for everything that we are facing. And the sooner that we begin to do it on the continent, the better. And finally, is really to thank each and every one of you. I'm joining Winnie in thanking all of you for making time and coming and joining in this discussion today. A lot of information has come out, Secretariat has collected, and it is going to be packaged so that it informs the way that at Africa CDC we are going to continue to coordinate this work. And we are very elated by the fact that literally all of you have mentioned that need being the reality of our times. Let's make sure that we are manufacturing here on the continent. So we are very sure that we are on the right track. With that, I would like to turn this back to Secretariat and the Director of Ceremonies for today. I know we finished a little early, but it's always good so that you can have an extra cup of coffee in between the two sessions. And I thank all of you panelists on behalf of myself and all Secretariat for accepting to come and sharing. And I'll turn it back to the Director of Ceremonies so that we can be able to be informed what the next step will be. Since all of us are virtual, I say today I'm the one buying the coffee, but you drink it from your office. Tomorrow you will be buying for the rest of us when we are physically together. Back to you, Secretariat. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the co-conveners. I think we're definitely ready for coffee. But I wanted to thank the co-conveners for this quite important discussion. You know, as we're identifying the barriers, we're also identifying some of the solutions and ways to fast track the capacity and preparedness of local manufacturers. And so, as we heard, it's quite important to look across the value chain from the discovery to the upstream and the downstream process. So the next session will zoom in on scaling up the vaccine R&D and the talent across the continent. Because we heard that is among the barriers that we currently have. So we have a room of 10 to 15 minutes, and then both for the guests in the room today and the guests online, we'll be right back, starting with Professor Annalise Williamson, who will be talking to us about the R&D coordination platform and regional centers. So yeah, without further ado, let's start a 10 to 12 minutes break, and then we'll be back here for the next engaging session. Thank you very much.